Listen, mate, I need to splash the boots. You know, strain the potatoes. Water the horses. You know, go where the big knobs hang out. Shake hands with the wife's best friend. Train the dragon. Siphon the python. Ring the rattlesnake. You know, unbutton the mutton. Like Point Percy at the porcelain.
I think he wants to go to the loo.
Stone the Crows, and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. We are your hosts. You can call me Jordo, and my mate here, Kumar, he's from the Commonwealth. I don't know about you, mate, but I'm as dry as a dead...
As a dingo's dong?
As a dead dingo's donger. So
By the way, since you said this was about feature films, that means I'm supposed to say, are you a pufta? Because you want to feature with me.
Yeah, well done. Well done. Very good.
I figured that out.
Thank you for prefiguring that very important element of this movie.
If you're wondering why we're speaking this way, this week we were talking about Barry McKenzie.
The Adventures
of Barry
McKenzie. From
1972. Did we say who we are? Yes, we did say who we are.
Yeah, I did.
It was lost, much like much of the book and the movie. I just didn't know what people were saying. What did that guy say? What was that?
It's fantastic. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, so this is a 1972 movie. We'll start with talking about the comic strip first. So this is a strip which appeared in Private Eye magazine.
Yep.
So Private Eye started in 1961. The strip started in the mid-60s. I couldn't find an exact date anywhere.
It was round about 1963, 1964.
Okay.
Because the character, they were having these discussions about the character in 1963.
Okay.
So he's got a kind of tortuous birth,
right? Okay.
So to speak. Barry Humphries, an Australian comedian, I suppose you'd call him.
Absolute legend. Yeah, we wrote this comic strip. That's special in itself.
Right.
Although, I don't want to interrupt you. You go ahead, and then I'll.
Okay, we'll come back to that. So he's living in the UK at this time.
Okay, this is one of my questions. And how famous is he? Okay, so he's building his career in the UK.
Correct.
We're assuming, like the Bee Gees, he couldn't make it in Australia, maybe? Or did he have a career in Australia?
Different. It's a little different. Barry Humphries is a kind of archetype that we don't see a lot anymore.
Okay.
Which is of the self-hating Australian expatriate.
Oh, okay.
Or self-loathing Australian expatriate.
Does Jermaine Greer fall into that camp?
The other superlative example.
Okay.
Like Barry Humphries is the kind of like the preeminent example of this kind of person.
By the way, this is so good for setting the stage because I'm just going to have to fire questions at you for the next 2 hours.
No worries at all.
Okay.
So we were talking about the genesis of the character. Humphries was doing, I guess, stand-up.
He's in the UK. He's been there for a while.
Yep.
He's semi-successful at this stage?
He's doing... I think in the very early 60s, not so much, I don't think.
Okay.
He's doing, I think, stand-up, one-man reviews.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
So I saw that... So Private Eye was coming out fortnightly. And I think I saw somewhere online that they were getting paid £50 per strip.
Whoa.
Between them.
That's...
So I think that's pretty low. So I'm guessing he didn't have any kind of star meter that was like bringing in...
Not in the early 60s.
Right, okay.
No.
Or even by 64.
Around about, I think he started appearing in... He was doing musicals and things.
Okay.
I think by the mid-60s. So he had a turn in Oliver and was starting to build his name as a kind of figure...
Okay.
Cultural figure in the UK.
Okay.
They kind of like these self-deprecating colonial types.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of the strip is about the culture of the UK trying to co-opt Australians just for being backwards or exotic.
Yeah.
And trying to exploit them.
Yes.
In that way. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So that's probably there's autobiographical in some respect in that sense. Yeah, so I think Peter Cook, of all people, kind of like famous British comedian and media personality.
Comedy royalty.
Yep. He apparently thought that there was space for a comic strip in Private Eye, and he apparently approached Humphries with the idea that they should come up with a character and write a strip about him. And he recommended the artist. Okay. Peter Cook recommended the artist, Barry Humphries.
Nicholas Garland.
Nicholas Garland. And apparently Cook is credited in that lengthy credit in the...
Very longest credit I've ever seen for a comic strip in a movie.
Even longer than the Judge Dredd one, arguably, since it's a complete sentence.
Yes.
He apparently came up with the name Barry McKenzie. So, and put him onto Nicholas Garland, and then they're off to the... And then that was the extent of his role.
Right.
And then they're off to the races.
Okay.
So, as an outsider, Kumar, how would you describe the character of... The strip and the character of Barry McKenzie?
Okay, before we get to that, we got to talk about Nicholas Garland for a split second.
Oh, okay. Absolutely.
So Garland had moved to New Zealand when he was a little kid in 46, I think age 11, and then moved back.
Okay.
Now, I'm guessing from your reaction that you didn't figure out anything about Nicholas Garland.
I must admit, I did a lot of research on a lot of people, but I didn't do Nicholas Garland.
He's the father of Alex Garland, who wrote Judge Dredd and Ex Machina and all that stuff.
Oh my god.
Yeah. What a connection that is.
Holy shit.
Yeah. That is a real holy shit connection.
Struth. You could knock me down with a feather.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, okay, so how would I describe this strip? Okay, so it's about this guy, Barry McKenzie. Opening strip, he has arrived in England. He's like, where are the cliffs of Dover? Now, part of this is I can't do the voice. I can't do his voice. So I'm going to be quoting him, and it's going to sound like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
This is nonsense. What are you saying? Because I can't do the accent. So he's arrived in England, but he is the archetypal, stereotypical, super backwards Australian. Not quite your Crocodile Dundee type, more like he wears a suit. He always wears a suit.
Yep.
And he's got this hat.
And a kubra. So like a felt hat.
Right.
With a wide brim, which is very... You still see it. It's worn by wanker rural populists.
Right. Okay, right.
Like Barnaby Joyce or Bob Catter from the far north of Queensland.
Right.
But no one really wears these hats anymore. And even actually when this strip came out, no one wore these hats anymore.
Yeah, right. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff in here that I didn't... It's also temporally displaced. Like I'm temporally displaced from the strip.
Yeah, you're not just culturally displaced, but temporally displaced.
I don't even know. Like
I'm temporally displaced.
I can't even figure. I wouldn't have picked up that this hat was already passé in 1964 when this strip. You know, I don't know what to make of this hat. It's just the hat that he wears and this suit. So he's
an innocent abroad.
Yeah, okay, so he needs to... His thing is he needs to drink Foster's lager all the time. He's always on the hunt for Foster's. He hates the British beer. Yeah. Well, the first time he tastes, he's like, never again.
Well, he's guided by kind of three... He has three guiding principles. He's come to the UK. Originally, he was supposed to be this kind of... I said innocent abroad, like the Mark Twain kind of thing. So he's the rural ignoramus...
Yes.
Who's being taken advantage of...
Yes.
By encountering kind of like the horrors of the metropole.
Yes, and but kind of getting by through like a kind of dumb luck or people not understanding him or where he's...
Well, when Humphries originally conceived of the script, he was going to use it to skewer... He was going to use Barry McKenzie to kind of skewer the things about the UK that he didn't like.
Right. And he does.
Yeah, but then sort of over a few strips, over a few 10s and 20s of scripts, Barry McKenzie sort of very much becomes the star.
Yes.
And it's sort of about his kind of picaresque adventures as he stumbles from...
Yes, he goes from one adventure to the next. Often he leaves a place and he's picked up by the people who will take him on the next adventure, like any kind of strip.
Yeah.
But sometimes...
I should say, he has three... I got ahead of myself. He has three guiding principles.
Yeah.
First of all, he's got a thirst you could photograph.
Yeah.
And he's always looking for a tube of frosty Fosters.
Yeah.
So we have some cinema veritas, so to speak, here. I've
Yes.
brought a 6-pack of Foster's along.
I think we're going to get to 4. Because the other thing he needs to do is...
The second one is he needs to go to the toilet.
He needs to go to the toilet. This is almost every strip.
Every strip.
He needs beer and he needs to piss.
He needs to piss more than he needs beer. Like, every single strip he needs to take a piss.
Yeah.
Except he never says take a piss.
No, not
he has
once.
An endless,
An array of...
hilarious variety of euphemisms for going to the toilet.
I would say it's not endless, and it gets quite repetitive.
Whoa.
I think a lot of the phrase... See, this part of... I'm having trouble placing this, because sometimes he uses a phrase, and the first time I see it, I say, oh, that's a joke phrase. Like, I need to drain the snake. I need to find the snakes.
He needs the snake's room, he says.
I need the snake's room.
Snakes.
I'm like, what the fuck is that? All right, so he says that, and I'm like, okay, that's a gag. But then he says it every single strip, and I'm like, oh, that wasn't a gag. That's an existing Australian expression, I guess. And it just happens again and again where these phrases are repeated. Anyway.
I suppose... No, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
The third thing he wants to do is score.
Yes.
He's trying to have sex.
Yeah, but not. It's like a lower priority than the beer by far, and pissing.
And pissing. So pissing's
always...
probably number one. I probably should have led with pissing, but I can't put the cart before the horse. We had to have the Fosters before the pissing. But actually, he's probably needs to find a dunny more than he needs to find a beer.
Yes. Okay. So and then
third of all, he's looking
for a woman. But then again, you get the same expression about she bangs like a dunny door in a storm. The first time you hear it, you're like, oh, okay, that's a joke.
Yeah.
And then he uses it again and again and again. But this is only coming out fortnightly, so I'm like, is it a joke for when the reader comes in after 2 weeks of not having seen the strip, and last week's strip has gone into the bin? Is this like a new joke?
Well,
or
it's good. This is, I suppose, this is the genius of the strip. Definitely.
Okay.
So this is being written in England for English people to read, right?
Right.
So, but it works, I think, it works either if you're in Australia or in England, really. Because what Humphries has done is he's cleverly kind of blended real slang that you might actually hear with stuff that he's completely made up.
Okay.
But that sounds authentic enough.
Yes.
That you're not sure if it's real or not.
Yeah, so this is why I'm reading it, and I can't figure out if these are just expressions or something he's come up with. And especially once he repeats it 50 times, I'm like, wait, is this an expression? Then he's got this, there's a glossary at the back.
Yeah.
So by the way, I wanted to mention that there were originally 3 collections that he put out in 68, 71. Then then the movie comes out in 72.
Yep.
Then there's a long gap, and the 3rd collection comes out in 79.
Yep.
I believe it was suppressed in Australia.
Yes,
which we have to come back around to.
It was.
But they have the second volume of these that I bought has like a glossary at the back with all the expressions in it.
Yes.
As if they're existing expressions, which some of them
are.
Right.
Some of them it's hilarious. And I think even someone that grew up in Australia like myself can't tell often which ones are real and which ones are. And he's also kind of artfully blended.
Right.
Some of them have recognizable cadences or characteristics that are definitely identifiably Australian slang and yet elaborate.
Okay.
He elaborates on them.
Okay.
It's actually, I must say, it's quite clever. This is the thing that I loved reading the strip.
Oh, yeah.
Anytime, it's like that episode of TNG Darmok.
Right. Right.
Anytime that Barry McKenzie is with his massive chin and his Akubra hat and his Robert Menzies suit, he's trying to get his message across to someone in England.
Yeah.
And he'll just come out with about 6, 7, 8 different aphorisms.
Yeah. Because he doesn't know, it's like he's never heard the original expression.
No.
I need to urinate. I need to urinate.
He can't say, I need the toilet.
Yes,
he can
can't
only say,
he's incapable.
I need to strain the potatoes.
Yes.
You know, splash the boots.
Yeah.
Shake hands with the wife's best friend.
Yeah.
Siphon the python.
Yes.
It just goes on.
Yes.
On. It's hilarious. Yeah. And it's so funny. First, the Poms are the English characters, or Poms as they call them in the strip, are first baffled.
Yeah.
But then over time, they start to adopt the slang themselves.
I was wondering, so I felt that later on, but I wasn't sure. Early on, they meet this family called the Gorts.
Yeah.
This very upper crust or they're faking
They're
their
upper middle class.
Yeah, but he gives her a present, and she says something like, "Thanks for the prezzo," and I was like, "Wait a second, this is Barry Humphries making a mistake. Like even he's got Mackenzie brain, like he can't get out. He doesn't know the word for present, so he's put the word prezzo into this British person's mouth, which I think was incorrect."
I don't know. It might have been acceptable slang.
Right.
It might have been an example of this pretentious family betraying their lower middle class roots. Or it might have been an example of them trying to ape the mannerisms of Barry because they believe him to be from the squattocracy.
Yeah, but they haven't heard him say the word prezzo. This is what was confusing.
But they might have.
About
Yeah,
it.
okay, that's fair.
So, but there's like stuff. It's hard to get a read on some bits of the script. My favorite part, I actually think the writing of it is brilliant. My favorite parts were the like promo for next week's episode and the recap.
Yeah.
Because those are said in a voice that's outside of the backwater Australians and the uptight Brits, or the Brits who are greedy and corrupt. That voice is completely outside of it, and they're like, there's a moment where Barry decides we're going to go to a movie, and he sees the sign for Baron's Court, and he's like, let's go see that. That's the cinema. Let's go in there.
But it's a tube station.
And it's a tube station. And then the recap in the next week says, Barry has gone into a tube station thinking it's a cinema. Yes, he really did that. Like, they know how dumb he is in that narration. Which I really love that. And there's one where he's in the toilet, as usual, and he's like, it's really lovely being on the loo. And he says something else. And then the recap for the next one said, we accidentally said lovely. It should have said lonely. And and I was like, okay, maybe did they put that lovely in there on purpose? I don't know, but the recaps were really
very funny. Quite often a strip would end, the final panel would end with Barry saying something extremely provocative or extremely incomprehensible.
Yes.
Yes. Or both.
Yes.
And then the strip would say, what could Barry have meant by that?
Yes.
Find out next week.
Yes.
You know, there's a line that makes it into the movie. One of the most memorable final panels is when it looks like he's having a moment with Leslie, who's a girl he grew up with who is now a kind of like liberated...
she's a bisexual who's dressing as a man at this stage.
Bisexual transvestite. And it looks like they're having a moment, and they're looking into one another's eyes, and he goes, you know what I saw? I thought, Leslie, when I saw you in that photo that your mum showed me, I thought, kiss my bum if she doesn't look like she goes like a dunny door in a typhoon or something like that. It's hilarious. And then you know, like the outro text says something like, what did Barry mean by that?
Yes. Yes, but we've heard it hundreds of times at this stage. We know what he meant by it.
Even the English reading audience are able to figure out what it means.
Yes.
So kind of like the gasping incredulity of the narrator is really funny.
Yes, the narrator's my favorite bit. There were some bits that were really odd. Like there's one strip where Barry says, I need to get some Oscar. And then there's actually a footnote. Usually you don't get footnotes for what he said. It's like, what did that mean? You have no idea what he meant.
Far between those footnotes.
Almost never. There's a little footnote that says, famous Australian actor Oscar Ashe. And I'm like, that doesn't help me. I need to get some Oscar. I'm looking at this. I'm scratching my head for a minute. Going, and then finally was like, okay, it's Cockney rhyming slang. It's cash. That's why he said Oscar. He needs cash.
Yeah.
But again,
he would do that, especially in the glossary. He would provide a fake definition.
Yes. Yes.
Where he's kind of like tapping his nose. It's like, you know the real definition here.
Right. Oh, yeah, well, there's a few of those we'll get to.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, so the fourth thing is that he needs to throw up all the time.
Oh, yeah.
He needs to throw up in order so that he can get more booze into him.
Yeah.
Now, Fosters. I don't know what...
He only drinks Fosters.
He only drinks Fosters, sorry. He needs to throw up on purpose, and they're proud of how much they vomit. They talk about how they vomit in a bucket, who could fill it up the fastest. This is the kind of comic strip this is, if you haven't gotten the sense by now. Is there a word for like bulimia for beer? Like, what is this? He's puking so he can drink more, although he never seems drunk. None of them ever seem drunk.
No. He doesn't seem drunk. He'll complain about really needing to take a whiz. He'll go, that's gone straight to Percy, or that's gone straight to the old fella.
Yeah. Yeah.
Point Percy at the porcelain is another one of my
Again
favourite
and again,
euphemisms.
yes.
That one, Humphries definitely invented.
Okay.
Yeah, but, they never get drunk. They chunder, as they say it, which is a kind of Melbourneism for throwing up that Humphries was particularly fond of. Barry Humphries is fascinated by, well, as you can tell from this comic, has a kind of childish fascination with bodily functions.
Yes.
Everyone's always taking a leak. Everyone's always throwing up, and they're always
throwing up on other people, on the walls, and then the cognoscenti, the arts cognoscenti is like, oh, this is art of some sort. Like, look how we threw up on the wall. And then they all start throwing up on the walls.
People mistaking Barry for a colonial intellectual.
Yes.
An artist.
Yes, he's what are the many jobs, I couldn't even write them all down. He gets a job with an advertising agency. He ends up on a TV documentary. He ends up writing for Fuzz magazine, which I guess was to be like Oz magazine.
Yeah.
He ends up singing with some hippies, he joins their band, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Well, it's not. They're not always confused. Sometimes they are trying to take advantage of him specifically.
Yes, you're right. Depending on whether or not, how credulous Barry Humphries thinks they are. So,
yeah.
If they're upper class twits, they're taken in by his nonsense. If they're skeezy kind of Americans or lower class people, like triers or spivs, then they're trying to take advantage of Barry. But Barry is essentially good-natured, I suppose. He's come with his cash that he made working on the Snowy Mountain scheme, except it's not the Snowy Mountain scheme, it's the Snowy Opera House.
Yes, but he also reveals in one strip that he was dodging the draft.
That can't be right. It's too early. 60...
There's definitely...
I didn't read that far.
There was definitely one where he says... It's only in one panel in one strip. I'll never be able to find it again because I read so many
massive.
of them.
There's lots, and they all blur into one another.
They're very text heavy.
Yeah.
Much like Pogo. I mean, if you're reading one every 2 weeks, you'd be fine.
It is like
reading
Pogo.
them all at once was like.
It's like Pogo in the sense that you're having to untangle
the language.
An incomprehensible dialect. Even for me, it's because of course Humphries is making up slang,
and it's the 60s, so there's also language that's going on
that doesn't exist anymore.
Yes.
It's funny.
Okay, we are going to go into some of the actual storylines because there are some that play into the movie.
Quite a few, actually.
But
the movie is a fairly faithful adaptation of the first.
So I did want to mention a couple of other things that I noticed about it, which is the racism is extreme to the point that that I noticed it. That I've forgiven a lot of racist comics that we've covered, but there was some stuff in here that was like, whoa, shocking, and it's done in a. He has this term for, I don't even know if I want to describe it. I'm not going to use the term. I'll say he's trying to describe taking a shit. And the term he uses many, many, many times is so offensive and gross. And I was like, I can't believe this. Meanwhile, did you notice they never use the word Christ? No, there's only one instance where someone says Christ. Every other time it's Key Reist or Kerr Reist or something.
Yeah.
Like, it's very conservative in that respect, which was like, I don't understand what is going on with that. There's also something, you think, okay, is he putting this racism onto Barry McKenzie? Is that how we're supposed to read it? But there's this thing going on with the cab drivers, which at first I didn't understand what was happening. Yeah. And he gets into a cab, and the cab driver, when he gets to his place, the cab driver lists off all these extra fees.
At this stage in the comic, everyone's ripping off.
It's right at the beginning.
Everyone's ripping off Barry because he's
fresh off the boat.
He's the babe in the woods. Yes. Yeah, fresh off the boat.
So he gets ripped off by this cab driver, and that happens again and again. And then later on, he meets this psychiatrist. He's been sent to a psychiatrist for evaluation because the doctor doesn't know how to deal with him, which is great. The psychiatrist looks just like Barry Humphries.
Yeah, he does, actually. This is before the film.
Yeah. And so there's a scene where the psychiatrist is standing next to the cab driver in profile, and Barry says, in profile, you look just like his mob. I was like, what does that mean? And it wasn't until maybe 20, 30, 50 strips later where he finally says to one of the cab drivers, go back to Israel.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this was like some intense anti-Semitic shit, which we were supposed to get from the fact that he was being ripped off in that first couple of weeks.
He calls that first... when he's first ripped off by that cab driver, he calls him a slur.
Right, which I didn't get.
He calls him an Ike Mo.
Yes, he uses that word several times. I've never heard that, so I don't know what it is.
It's from kike.
Oh, okay.
And the thing is, if you look it up in Humphries' glossary,
I did.
It says London cab driver.
Right, that's as bad.
Yeah. And now we're straying into something that I don't like about Humphries' comedy, that it's a bit racist. A bit conservative in that sense, like punching down on minorities that he doesn't approve of.
Right.
And frankly, a little bit misanthropic at times.
Misanthropic is fine. I don't mind if... I like the fact that Barry McKenzie was the target of the script and all the Brits were the target of the script. Everybody was the target. That was fine with me. But there were these specific things...
It does seem like he's... But who isn't he? I mean, who are the missing characters? Who isn't he criticizing?
Right.
There are people missing. Like you pointed out yourself with the lack of the word Christ doesn't appear, for example.
Right.
We only get variations of it. So Humphries. I don't like Barry Humphries.
Right.
Now's as good a time as any.
Right.
I don't particularly like. But the thing is, by the time I was aware, 90s. He'd been doing his Dame Edna shtick for like 20 years.
Right.
Flouncing about in frocks, hanging out with the upper crust in the UK, and mocking the country he came from, and being celebrated for it.
Okay.
And this comic I like, but if you squint, you can see these elements there right from the start.
Yeah, right.
Who's missing? We never meet a noble person, and any member of the nobility. We only meet these... priggish...
There's no House of Lords.
No, we only meet these priggish middle-class fuckwits who are getting above their station, and yobs, rip-off merchants. Who's missing? And when you look at who's missing, you understand a little bit about how Humphries saw himself, how he saw the country he came from.
Right.
Yeah. Well, interesting. I still like the comic. I think the writing is very clever.
I agree. I agree, but there are elements in it that to me are just unforgivable.
Sure. I completely agree as well, actually. And we'll talk a bit more about that when we get to the film.
Yes. Okay, so some of the storylines. So one of the first ones is when he arrives, he decides to go meet this family called the Gorts.
Yes.
He just writes them a letter. Now, the Gorts were a family that during the war, Australians, his family specifically, had been sending them...
produce.
Yeah, like produce, like almost like rations, like they had raisins and stuff that they would send overseas to England during the war. So he's kind of like, well, we have a family connection. I'm saying these in words that in no way describe the tone of voice of this drama. I'm doing such poor service.
I can't even do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't write down a lot of...
incomprehensible gibberish.
I didn't write down a lot of quotes because every line out of his mouth is like...
Nothing. He never says anything in plain English.
Yeah. So he goes over there. They're like, oh, he must be one of those rich landowners. Like he must own a farm or
they think he's like a squatter.
Right.
So someone from the squattocracy, someone who has an enormous lands and runs.
So they're like, okay, we've got to marry off our daughter. By the way, almost every girl that turns up is like super ugly, but he's like, well, I'll do it because he had his crude expression for this too, which is like, you don't look at the mantelpiece when you're stoking the fire.
Yeah, he says it. The other Aussies that rattle up say it, who are all just carbon copies of Bazza.
Right. Yes.
Wearing the same akubras.
Yes.
Wearing the same kind of suits, suit and tie.
Okay, so he shows up at the place. They are convinced he's rich. They try to marry him off to their ugly daughter. They go to a social. And when they come back that night, there's hijinks, of course, at the social. When he comes back, he tries to make out with her on the front lawn.
Yep.
The family are like, oh, did you... What do they call it? Making hospitals or something? Did you
playing hospitals?
Playing hospitals?
Yeah, that's her mum's euphemism for... Is her name Sarah?
I can't remember. But
Sarah or Susan. Her
Mrs.
mum's
Gort.
euphemism. Yeah, Mrs. Gort's euphemism for, I suppose, first base. Is it?
Well, I assumed it was playing doctor, which is, which is Yeah, well, not far, but she assumes that he proposed to her at the
he's
social.
hoping that she's hoping she's off her rocker essentially.
Right.
She's
Yes.
hoping that.
Oh, the husband is off his rocker too, and there's a great scene where he keeps inviting Barry into his den, and the wife is like, "Don't take him into the den, you pervert! I know what you did with her
That's
previous
quite
boyfriend."
funny, actually. He does eventually go into the den looking for Fosters,
Yeah.
and Mr. Gort is dressed up like a schoolboy.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Looks like Billy Bunter or whoever, and he wants him, and then he makes Barry dress up as a schoolmaster.
Yeah.
In like a mortarboard and gown, and then he wants him to thrash him, give him 6 of the best.
Thank me, master. Yes. Yes. Great. I loved all that stuff.
Yeah, very funny.
Yeah. So then I don't remember what he does after he. Funny. You know what? A funny thing in here is another thing we haven't kind of touched on is he like complains. I love it when he complains that they only have 3 TV channels in England. When I landed in Australia 20 years ago. To the month, I was like, there's only 3 fucking TV channels in this country. This is like being in Vietnam. What is this? I thought this was a developed country.
There was at least 5. Come on, man.
No, there was 5. But still, I was like, is this real? What year is it? And now there's like 20, but they're all still the same 5. Each one just has like 3 or 4.
Television scouts.
Anyway, I was like, and I love when they talk about how they're looking at the British people's houses. They're like, look at the terrible way they live.
Yeah, they can live on the smell of an oily rag.
Yeah, like, and how miserable it must be for them.
And he says they're still members of the Commonwealth, though.
And I also love bits like where sometimes Barry will meet other Australians who he thinks are being really crude-mouthed in front of the women, and that really offends him. Like at one point, one of my favorite bits is the ghost of his great-grandfather appears, and he starts saying some stuff, which isn't that bad, but Barry's so offended by the words coming out of his mouth in mixed company.
Yeah.
He's outraged by it. I loved all those kind of ironic bits.
Yeah.
Where he's like unaware of himself.
Because he's incredibly crude himself.
Yeah.
And he will often apologise for being incredibly crude.
Yes.
Right after he said something crude.
Yes.
It's funny.
Yeah. Okay, so
the next adventure we'll look at, he'll often get a telegram or a letter.
That happens a few times when Humphries wasn't quite able to figure out how to transition to the next storyline. Yeah. There will be a letter. And he'll go pick up the letter and I'll be that on the next storyline. But I think in this case he went out after he left this house.
Yeah, he's hitchhiking.
He's hitchhiking. He gets picked up by this folk band, these hippies, and they're like, they hear him sing some song about puking on the beach.
Yeah.
And
Chundering in the old Pacific Sea.
Right. They're like, the guys in the band are like, oh, we can exploit this. We can record him and make money off of this as authentic, like, Australian folk music.
Yeah, this is another group that Humphries clearly doesn't like or approve of.
Right.
You know, like hippies. He's a bit like Robert Crumb, I suppose, in that respect.
Yeah. I don't remember Crumb ever being like that hippies are hypocrites, but these guys are really hypocritical. Like they only care about money.
They're driving around in their VW kind of like van and talking about how they're playing the simple music that the working man wants to hear.
Right.
But they're actually kind of like crooks.
Yes,
and they get Barry to sign a contract. They secretly tape him when he gives a performance, and they're just trying to exploit him, basically.
Yeah. Yes, and then somehow he ends up in the hospital after this.
Well, there's a big blue. He's at this gig where he sings his Chundering in the Old Pacific Sea song. He's spotted by an actual record producer who tries to sign him. And then the blokes the hippies then see that. They get aggravated.
Right.
They come in. There's a bit of a fracas.
Yeah.
There's a big fight. Barry gets roughed up and wakes up in hospital, essentially.
Yes. And then the doctor can't deal with him.
Because he can't understand what he's saying. He's trying to go to the toilet. He's trying to take a piss again.
Yes.
It's so funny.
Yes.
And he just keeps coming out with these euphemisms.
Yeah.
You know, strain the potatoes.
Yes. Yes. And so they're like, well, we need to send him to a psychiatrist. They send him to the psychiatrist who I mentioned before. Doctor, I wrote down his name somewhere.
Lachlan or Lamprey or...
Delamprey. So this psychiatrist is there's really funny exchange here. It's so well written. He's like, Barry's talking about Australia, the motherland, and he says, "Oh, your mother. What's your relationship with your mother?" Yeah. And then he talks about wanting to puke on the park carpet, or he laugh at the carpet is the expression for.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Technicolor laugh on the. Yeah, he's.
And then the doctor's like, "Oh, you have an issue with the carpet or something," and he's like trying to psychoanalyze.
So then
all these things he's saying.
Then Barry spews on his head.
Yes. Well, he spews all the time, but in this case, he spews on the doctor's head, who doesn't mind.
No.
He's like, let out your aggression.
Yeah, in whatever way you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Eventually, so he meets this girl this Australian girl. I think her name was. It's Gayleen in the movie. What's Gayleen in the? I think it was Gayleen in the comic because I think it was a play on gay. So she's been in Australia, or she's been in the UK for a couple of years, and her mom is worried about her because she's changed or whatever, and she won't come home. Yeah. So Barry goes over there. He's probably got a telegram to get into the story.
Well, he meets the mother at the airport.
Oh, that's right.
And escorts her.
That's right.
To her house.
Yes.
He sees a photo of her. And they go, and then she opens the door, and this works better in the comic than it does in the film.
Oh, 100 times better. We'll talk about that when we get to the movie, but yeah, so...
what looks like a bloke answers the door.
Yeah.
And they talk to her as though she's a bloke, but she's actually a woman in drag, dressed as a man.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the line she says is something like, I got tired of that hetero scene, or something like that.
Yeah.
So... The reason I say that she's bisexual is because the alternative that she's homosexual is too offensive. Because Barry basically makes out with her, and then she goes back. Yeah. So I have to. Well, I have to say that she's bisexual, or I will lose my mind.
No. This is another. Well, look, I don't want to read too far into this, but Humphries himself, despite making his fortune, dressing in drag, was very straight.
Right.
Had like 4 wives. Bunch of kids, and I don't know, you can't help, and was also later in life transphobic.
Right. Okay.
Made transphobic statements, and there was some controversy shortly before his death where the Melbourne Comedy Festival used to have an award named after him.
Okay.
But they renamed it after he made transphobic comments.
Okay.
This is coming from a bloke that wore a dress.
Yeah.
And a wig and fucked around.
Okay, well, we'll talk about all that.
And, on the other hand, though, women dressing as men... That seems, from Humphries' perspective, writing these comics, to be weird and a bit beyond the pale. And Barry, as you said, she thinks she's gay because she has this older woman as a lover.
Yeah.
And yet Barry kind of puts her on the straight and narrow, and she gets back with her husband.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to read too far into it, but but it also seems like it's part of a pattern.
Right. Okay.
Kumar, I'm as dry as a nun's nasty over here. I'm going to crack another tube of the chilled article, mate.
Okay, so they end up bumping into her husband on the subway. And her ex-husband, Dominic.
Yeah. He's called Dominic. Bazza thinks that he's ethnic because he works for Granada, the television company.
And also thinks that he does features on TV, which to him... Where does that expression come from, features?
This might be...
Is it some sort of rhyming slang? Because features means sex in Barry's mind.
Yeah.
So anytime you hear...
This one I have no answer for.
Okay.
In fact, I tripped up on this constantly.
It was like feature, creature. I was trying to figure out what it could possibly...
To do a feature or have a feature is to have sex.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I have no... I know nothing about this. It could be something he invented. It could have been something from the 60s.
Yeah.
Humphries grew up... He had a working class upbringing in Melbourne.
Right.
He was exposed to a lot of this kind... He's... Allegedly, he said when he wrote this, he just used what he heard...
Okay.
As a kid, and then as a younger man in pubs, and just kind of like cranked it up.
Right.
And made it... Turned it up to 11. Right. Just made it ever so slightly more ridiculous than it actually is. So I don't know if a feature is a real Aussie slang from the period or not. I couldn't say.
Okay. So anyway, this guy's like, hey, he's another guy that wants to co-opt Barry, take advantage of him. He's like, oh, I'm doing this program about Australians living in the UK. This documentary, come on.
Barry's drunk again and needs to take a leak like he always does.
Yeah.
They end up giving him some pills, I think, because this is the first time anyone's ever been drunk in this strip.
Right.
He's falling asleep or something, or he doesn't have the wherewithal. He sometimes talks about not being able to get it up Endless euphemisms for it, though.
Yeah.
He never actually says that.
Right.
You're just left guessing.
Yeah.
He says Brewer's Droop, I think.
Yes, in the movie.
In the movie, he says Brewer's Droop, but in the comic, I think it's even more vague.
Right.
He just says things like, can't raise the midden mast or something like, just crazy nonsense.
Yeah.
And anyway, so Dominic gives him some uppers,
Yeah.
essentially, and it makes him go a bit loopy. Also, he's been told by Dominic on the tube that Dominic uses the word cock, but to address him. He says, I want
cock.
Come on the show, cock.
Yeah.
Like, as a,
Right.
just like a way that, like, I'm aware of this term.
Yeah.
It's not fashionable at all now, but sometimes
Right.
people would address one another as cock.
Old cock or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And of course, Basil just hears, oh, you're interested in my old
Yes.
fella.
Yes.
You're
You
interested
puffed
in
up.
Percy.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a poofter. Anyway, then he gets it in his head that they want to see his dick,
Yeah.
and he ends up stripping off his pants
Right.
on television.
Right.
And there's a big to-do. Of course, the pretentious types are fascinated by the fact that they think this is the greatest thing that's ever happened
Yes.
on TV. It's spontaneous.
Yeah.
It's fresh. It's new. It's urgent.
Yes.
And they end up offering him like his own TV show or something, but it doesn't eventuate, and he goes on to his next adventure. He gets a telegram, I think, that his twin brother is coming to...
He has his twin brother who's a reverend.
Yeah. So stupid.
Kev the Rev.
Kev the Rev.
Who's identical.
Identical twin brother.
So that he has to take over for him at one stage.
He has to give a sermon
There's also...
in his cassock,
Yeah, yeah.
and of course he gives this stupid sermon where he says, everyone take a load off and have a smoke, and they're all like, oh, this is so wonderful.
Yeah. There's also a bit of a storyline here where he meets up with these kids whose parents are hippies and are upset that their
that's a
kid
funny
is really
story.
straight.
Yeah.
I think this must be one of the earliest examples of this, because it is a kind of trope that comes up, but I think must be maybe the first even that I've seen.
In the mid
60s,
60s,
where the parents are like really like, hey man, smoke a joint, and the kids are really straight and they're so disappointed in the kids for being so straight.
It's so funny because the parents themselves aren't hippies. It's more that they just really want their
They're
kids
liberal.
to
They're
be
super
hippies.
liberal.
Yeah, they're liberal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they make the kids wear like muumuus and won't let them get married in a church.
Yes.
He just wants to get married and get a job at the bank.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
Just like, no, put
That's
that flower
right.
pot back.
I think
over
this is
there.
also where they have is the governess like this kind of Ilsa of the SS type? Is that in
that
the
was a bit weird.
storyline?
Yeah, that was here.
But there's a big house fire, and Barry calls over all his Australian friends to drink beer and piss out the fire.
Yep.
I just want to point that out because it comes up in the movie. And that's
it
about
happens in the movie.
It happens. So that's basically where I read the first two of the three volumes.
Same. I got to about this point as well.
Yeah.
There's a pretty clear cut off in that omnibus that you gave me.
Right. Yes. Oh, actually, no. It did go further.
Oh, you read about the great grandfather. I never got to that point.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the film.
There's yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah. We can talk about the film. I don't need to talk.
Yeah, we're at 40. We're at 45
We
minutes.
can come back to some of this stuff. Okay, movie comes out in 1972.
So this is 10 years after the comic was, I guess, first being printed.
Yes, and
Around about 10 years.
comic was cancelled in 74. Apparently, Humphries was late with his deadlines because of his excessive drinking, maybe.
I thought he'd kind of dried out by the mid-70s.
Okay, maybe, but there was some sort of... I don't know, he was late for some reason.
Yeah.
That's the
74
that's the
as late
reason
as that?
given, yeah.
Okay.
So a couple
So
of
it was
years.
still being published in the UK when the films were coming out?
As far as I found, yeah.
Okay.
Unless I got something wrong there.
That's cool.
Okay, so I didn't write down the actual writer of this or director or anything.
It was
names
the
that I
director
knew.
is Bruce Beresford,
Okay.
who is a famous Australian director,
Okay.
very well known for adapting plays to films. He directed Driving Miss Daisy, which won an Academy Award.
Right.
He did two very well regarded Aussie films of the 1970s, Don's Party and The Club.
Right.
Both David Williamson plays,
Yep.
famous Australian playwright.
So
This was his first feature film. He'd done shorts before this.
Okay.
What happened was he was a friend of Humphries.
Okay.
He was living in London.
Okay.
And in the early 70s, there was a campaign to produce more Australian cinema. This is usually associated with the Labor government that came in the
Okay.
early 70s, but it actually precedes that. It was, so what's now called Screen Australia, but was then called the Australian Film Funding Commission or something like that.
Okay.
Set up by John Gorton, Liberal Prime Minister of the late 60s, making money available to revive...
Well, this is when the revolution happens, right? 70s Australian cinema is like...
Aussie New Wave.
Just like...
Yeah.
All these amazing movies.
The greatest Australian films.
Exactly, yeah. This was...
Wake in Fright.
Yeah.
You'll be shocked to hear, Kumar, that certain people consider Barry McKenzie to be among these.
I was going to ask this. Is this like the beginning of it, or is it actually considered to be one of these peak movies?
If you ask the makers of the film, so Humphries, Berenstain, and the producer Philip Adams, they say that this is an enormously influential film.
Right.
Barry McKenzie.
Interesting.
Kicked off the new wave.
Okay.
That's
Right.
ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Though they did get funding from this government grant, which...
It was entirely funded by a government grant.
Right, okay.
Not many films are.
Yeah.
The budget for this film was 250,000 Australian dollars in 1972, which is a pretty decent sum.
Okay.
It was given to the film on the condition that they seek other funding as well.
Uh-huh.
No one else was interested in funding a Barry McKenzie movie, so they made it on $250,000.
Wow, okay.
It was very successful.
Yeah, yeah.
Hugely successful.
Where? With who?
In Australia.
Okay.
Made a lot of money in Australia. The first Australian film to make more than $1 million.
Okay. So what's the timeline of the suppression of the books and the release of the movie? Do we have any idea?
I don't know at what point the books were... So the books were, as you said, were banned.
Okay.
As being indecent. They were censored.
Yeah.
You couldn't publish the book in Australia. Astonishing. And then I have no idea when it became legal to publish.
Okay.
Something I could have looked up, but I didn't. I wouldn't be surprised if the comic was still banned when the film came out.
Okay, that's
because
interesting.
the film itself attracted an R rating from the censors
of course.
At the time. Well, the R rating was very new.
Yeah, right.
It was one of the first films to get an R rating.
Right.
Right. And nowadays it doesn't have an R rating. Now the DVD release has an M.
Okay, that's Australian M. Because there is nudity in this movie.
Yeah, very little.
I would say it's prolonged.
2 pairs of breasts.
Yeah, I would say it's in the US it would get an R, unless it was Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. It would definitely get an R.
That was a PG film.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I still can't believe that was PG. You saw everything.
Quote unquote non-sexual nudity in the shower. Yeah. Okay, so...
That still blows my mind.
Right. So, okay, 72. By the way, some of the credits, the music's by Peter Best. Is that the fifth Beatle, Pete Best? Is that who that is?
I don't know. Couldn't say.
Okay.
The score's alright. But yes, so the writers, as you asked, Humphries and Beresford wrote it together.
Okay.
So, as you're aware, it's adapted quite faithfully from the first 100 strips or so.
Yeah.
And Humphries and Beresford kind of turned it into this script. Apparently it was Beresford's idea that Dame Edna, Mrs. Edna, Auntie Edna at this point, she's not Dame Edna until the next film. Auntie Edna appears in it. It was apparently at his suggestion. Humphries was reluctant to have Edna appear in it.
That's interesting. I think it was a good choice.
Yeah, it is, obviously. She was originally reluctant because in the movie, Barry is common from Sydney, and Edna is kind of like...
Oh, upper crust, a little bit.
Aspirational upper crust from Melbourne.
Right.
So he got around that by making her Barry's auntie from Melbourne.
Right, okay. So Edna was an existing character?
Yes, one that Humphries had already been doing.
On stage or whatever.
Barry McKenzie himself was based on a character that Humphries had kind of been
Yes, I saw that, but yeah.
Called Buster Thompson.
Okay, right, okay. And who's the actor that's playing Barry in this?
Barry Crocker.
Barry Crocker. So, wait a second. So Barry Humphries, Barry McKenzie, and Barry Crocker?
Yep.
Are you kidding me?
Nope.
Okay, so he's kind of got the chin for it. He's got a cartoonishly large chin in the comics, and they've probably chosen the only actor, I'm guessing at the time, that could have played the role with the chin that size.
He's got the chin. He's very kind of genial.
Too genial.
You think? Yeah.
Immediately. So opening scene.
It was a bit rougher. The one in the comics is a bit rougher.
It starts in Sydney. It doesn't start in the UK. It starts in Sydney, which is interesting. That means we are sympathizing with him being an Australian who's going to be a fish out of water.
Yes.
Instead of just an idiot. What are you doing here? Also, it starts with him getting this inheritance and being told to go to the UK, which doesn't happen until much later in the strip, where he goes back to Australia, gets an inheritance, gets told to come back to England.
Yes.
Because he's a draft dodger.
Yeah. I didn't get to that point.
Right. So it's a more sympathetic character, but also I felt like he was subdued. Like, I expected this guy to be over the top.
He's not quite as raucous, is he?
Right.
Well, it kind of makes the character a bit more likable. Also, it's never confirmed in the comic, but in the film, Barry is a virgin.
Yes.
So all this talk, the blokes that talk about it most do, at least.
Yeah.
All this talk about skirts and going into the airplane toilet for a quick knee trembler.
Yeah.
He says that he tries it on with every girl he meets, but actually has no experience whatsoever with women.
Yes, that is interesting. It's not really clear in the comic.
No, he never gets any.
He never gets any. He tries and fails because he always needs to go to the toilet, and then something happens. In fact, I wrote that one line. There's one where he's about to have it on with this girl in the park, and he needs to go take a leak by the bushes. Cops show up, and I wrote this down. I'm going to read it in my Canadian accent.
Yeah.
Turn that torch off, or me Sheila will get a ringside deco at me nasty.
Your rendition of that just makes it perfect.
I get the feeling in the movie early on, I was like, oh, are they going to try to structure a narrative where the whole plot is about him trying to get laid, like an 80s sex comedy?
No, there's no plot.
It's not. And I actually like that. I like that they didn't actually try to form a kind of storyline.
Okay, good. Okay.
Out of a movie. Like, they didn't go to say, hey, this is a movie, we need to create a structure.
It's a bit like my favourite movie, Napoleon Dynamite.
Right.
We just keep coming back to Napoleon Dynamite again and again on this podcast.
Yeah. Okay, so he gets his inheritance, but unlike the comic, he's going to fly over with his Aunt Edna. Now, as I mentioned, did I read the credit for the comic strip?
Please read it. It's the best credit ever.
Comic strip said here's the credit in the movie. Based on the Barry McKenzie comic strip written by Barry Humphries with drawings by Nicholas Garland as published in Private Eye from an idea by Peter Cook.
One sentence.
Yeah. One huge sentence. And it takes up a whole screen.
It takes about half most of the screen.
Yeah. 2/3 of the screen. He's they stop over in Hong Kong.
Yes, it is Hong Kong, yeah. I watched this with Vannie, my wife, and she recognised Hong Kong straight away.
Yes, shot on location in Sydney, Hong Kong, and London.
Correct.
Okay, he's kind of eyeing the stewardess's legs. There's no attractive women in the comic, I don't think. Or they're drawn away by Nicholas Garland that they aren't, I think, even if they are narratively
certainly not not the ones I read. I noticed that later on some more attractive ones pop up later in the comic. But yes.
So they arrive in the UK. He's like, where are the cliffs of Dover? Much like in the comic. He goes through customs. He gets charged for all the stuff he bought in Hong Kong.
Much like the comic.
In the comic, it wasn't clear to me why he was being charged for stuff he brought from Australia. I didn't realize there had been a stopover in Hong Kong, which of course makes sense. Okay, at this stage, I wrote down a bunch of phrases that I need you to explain to me. Now, one of them you did explain to me during the Fatty Finnex episode, which was Bonzer, and I'd forgotten what it meant. But I worked out it means great. Yeah. I don't know what the derivation, the etymology.
We talked about the etymology of it in the Fatty Finnex
That's
episode.
why I was like, oh, I should know this.
I think actually you cut it.
Oh, I did?
We won't go into it again.
Okay. What is raw prawn?
To come the raw prawn means to act as if you're green. To pretend that you don't know.
To feign ignorance. To play dumb.
Spot on.
Okay. I wonder why they call it a raw prawn. Okay, you wouldn't...
That's a genuine Australian expression to come.
You wouldn't read about it.
Unbelievable. To be unbelievable.
Oh, okay. These expressions come up again and again in the comic and the movie, and I was just like, I never figured them out. Okay, they take a very long taxi ride. They are charged a bunch of bonus fees on the taxi ride, much as in the comic, but... Right away,
the slur.
We get the slur, and he also tells him to go back to Israel as soon as he gets out of the
straight out off the bat.
This is the first 5 minutes.
This is 10 years later too, from when the comic was first published.
72. Okay.
So, it was crap in the early 60s and it's crap in the early 70s.
Yeah. We might have to come back to this a little bit.
The filmmakers, well, yeah, we will have to come back to this. And as to how the filmmakers defend this kind of language.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, so he meets up with his friend Curly.
Yep.
We learn later in the movie that Curly actually writes poetry and now he's working on a novel.
The great Australian novel.
Yeah.
Blood on the Surfboard.
Yeah. Yeah. But, so Curly has set up Barry with an apartment, which is actually a total shithole.
It's not just any part. It's like a flat for rent.
Yeah.
And the landlord is Spike Milligan.
Yes.
Which-
Yes, more comedy royalties.
My eyes just about fell out of my head when I saw that.
Yep.
He's constantly trying to upstage everyone else whenever he's on camera.
Yeah.
He's doing all these bits. Like, Barry shakes hands with him and he does this bit with his cardigan.
Yeah. I noticed that and didn't even know what he was doing.
It's just Spike Milligan wanting to be the center of it.
Right.
He's upstaging everybody.
Yeah, so then Curly takes Barry to a pub.
Yep.
Where Barry tastes the beer and is disgusted by it and wants some Fosters, makes some racist comments about Hong Kong. And then he's scouted in the pub by this guy whose name was Groove.
Yep.
Who wants him to advertise High Camp cigarettes.
Yes.
Now, he shoots this commercial where he's supposed to be a cowboy. He's wearing these leather pants, these tight black leather pants. I actually really enjoyed this sequence.
It's funny.
It's a really funny bit where he keeps screwing up his lines. You know how it's going to go, where they do 100 takes where he can't get his lines right. We've seen it in other movies. It doesn't matter. It works really well.
And it's very funny. He just keeps getting around. It's firm between your fingers and cool between your lips. And he just cannot get the line right. He just keeps saying endless variations. And then in the end he says,
firm between your hips.
He says firm between your hips. It's cool between your lips and firm between your hips. And in a prefiguring kind of moment, Groove is thrilled by this. What a brilliant ad-lib!
Yeah.
What an authentic, colonial ad-lib. Firm between the hips. Print it! Yeah. And then the woman to whom Barry is offering a cigarette is a kind of like a blonde bombshell.
Yes. Her name is Carol. Yeah.
Yes, Carol, and she's very interested in Barry and gives him her phone number.
Yeah.
Barry, for some reason, Curly's showed up. Barry confides in Curly. She's keen. Barry's very. We don't know his version at this point. He's acting very confident, talking about all of his experience and stuff. And they're always talking about how the Pom girls don't like it plain and simple.
Yes, comes up in the comic a lot.
Yeah.
Or the Poms don't like it plain and simple.
Yeah. Because they're effete
Right.
pervs.
Right.
Kind of like the baddies in a Garth Ennis comic.
Right. Right.
And so Curly advises him to go to a sex shop.
Yeah.
And read a sex manual.
Yeah.
Which he does. He goes, it's called the Perfumed Fanny,
Yes.
which is a combination of, a couple of different
Yes,
kinky
but it's
books.
supposed to be like the Kama Sutra.
Yeah, so I think the Perfume Garden is the book.
Right.
And maybe there's another one. There's another book with the word fanny in it,
Right.
and it's combined the two.
Right.
Anyway, and it's just...
Is Fanny Hill that...
Something like Fanny Hill,
It's
yeah.
right.
Probably Fanny Hill,
Okay.
yes. Anyway, the Perfumed Fanny. Anyway, he's reading the book, and it's... We hear some kind of sitar kind of... And looks like he's doing yoga. He keeps positioning himself in all odd postures. And he goes, geez, I hope these pom birds go for this, or something like that. And then he can't do much with the yoga, so he skips forward to a bit where it says...
What the aphrodisiacs are.
The aphrodisiacs. So you need to anoint the loins with... there's all these exotic sounding spices. And initiate the Congress of the Bee, and she will be your slave. So he goes to, the local, Asian grocery.
Yeah.
And he's holding his porno book.
He's trying to read. One thing I like in the movie is he's almost illiterate. He really has trouble reading.
Yeah.
And he's trying to read these exotic names to this guy who's working in the Indian grocery store.
Incidentally, I want to go back to the sex shop. That was in Soho, that particular shop. A real shop.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Barry goes to the Young Conservatives dance later on when he's with Susan?
Yeah.
There are posters on the walls of the local Conservative candidate.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? the camera seemed to linger on it for some reason.
Huh.
What happened was he was supposed to come out of the sex shop.
Oh, gotcha.
But they didn't get any permissions for any of their shoots.
Yeah, okay.
So they got rushed off that location. That's
Right.
why that shot is so quick.
Right,
You just
right.
see him quickly going in the door.
Right.
Philip Adams, who produced the film, he says that it was a non-union shoot and everything had to be done quietly because they expected to get rumbled at any time for not
Right.
having union labour,
Right.
for not getting any of the permissions, because they did it on a shoestring budget because they just got that $250,000 grant from the Australian government and no other funding, and they spent a bunch of it on airfares.
Right. Yeah, in Hong Kong. They stopped in Hong Kong.
They stopped in Hong Kong and shot on Star Ferry out in in Victoria Harbour.
Yeah, so he buys all these groceries which he thinks are close to what he's supposed to get. Or
No. Well, the Hindi, the bloke, the Indian bloke, says some things in Hindi and then says, "Oh, we're all out. There's been quite the run on exotic spices, sir." And he goes, "Well, then you better just give me some tikka masala,
Right.
some of the chutney, and maybe give me a few tins of that beef and prawn curry."
Yeah.
It's just this extremely beef and prawn curry.
Yeah.
There's some they're in a yellow tin.
Yeah.
It's the most unappetizing looking stuff.
Yeah. You won't get beef anyway in an Indian grocery.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And prawns.
Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of combo is that? And of course, Indian. Yeah, you don't eat beef.
Yeah.
Unless you're. This guy presumably wasn't a Muslim.
Yeah, but where are the tins coming from?
Yeah.
This is the question. So anyway, he goes over to Carol's house. She's ready to get on. She strips down. I really like the sequence. She's got this bizarre mirror that like undulates.
Well, I think that's meant to show Barry's nervousness.
Oh, I see. Well, it was specially built. There's a
It looks
special credit
gross.
in the end credits. There's a special credit for whoever built the mirror.
It looks amazing.
Yeah.
It keeps going in and out like he's vertiginous.
Yes.
Because he can't. This chick
so
is sex
nervous.
on legs.
Yes.
She's really, really pretty.
Yeah.
And she's topless.
Yeah. And she's ready. She's
Yeah.
ready to go. And he takes off his shirt. This is one of my favorite bits of the movie. His shirt says "Palmy Bastard." It was really great. It's like I haven't
Why
laughed
does
at a
his
shirt
shirt
like
say
that. Like
Palmy
when
Bastards?
why is he wearing a shirt that says "Palmy Bastards"? It reminded me of like Austin Powers when he was with his pants. He's got the Union Jack underwear.
Yeah.
It was like that was such a moment because there's some writing on his shirt and he's looking in the mirror. So you're like, what does his shirt say? And it's reversed.
It just says "Palmy Bastards."
And he takes it. It says "Palmy Bastards." Wow.
So he opens. She's saying, "Come on, Barry, I'm ready."
Yeah.
And he opens the tin.
Yeah.
It's like dog food.
Yeah.
And he just kind of dumps it down his
his underwear.
pants.
He does that in the comic, I believe, in a strip.
Oh, I didn't get that
Yeah,
far.
yeah, yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. He does do that. He thinks that's what he's supposed to do with it, is pour it down his underwear.
It just like packs his dacks with this beef.
Yeah.
This tin of beef.
Yeah. Then he gets into bed. He's too nervous to get it on with her, but it's before he can get up the nerve to do it. Groove, the director of the commercial, shows
Yeah.
up and is like, get out of here. They have a big fight.
Yeah.
He goes back to Curly's. This is where he talks about how he's writing a novel. I like this sequence because while he's describing this novel he's going to write, Barry's looking at a skin mag
Yeah.
and flipping through pages, so it's completely deflates what this guy's talking about. It works really pretty well.
That scene is good.
Yeah. They get in a big fight in his apartment.
Well, they get it. Yeah. They're kind of roughhousing because they
Right.
both get really drunk.
Yeah.
Like Barry's tuning out all this talk about the great Australian novel he's going to write about the juxtaposition between the violence in Australian culture and its pseudo-intellectual cravings towards XYZ. And he says, "I'm going to call it blood on the surfboard." It's very funny. It's very funny.
Yeah.
And then like Barry's just like, "Jesus, mate, haven't you got any Frosty Fosters?" And Curly just smiles and they go to the bathtub. The bathtub's absolutely full of Foster's cans.
Yeah.
We get a fade out where we see it full, then we see it empty. They've drunk it all 30 cans. And then they're sort of roughhousing and getting in a fight. There's a woman in the apartment with them. She doesn't have any lines. She doesn't have a name.
She doesn't have a top. She's topless.
Yeah.
While they're wrestling.
She doesn't have a
over
top.
her.
She doesn't have a line. She doesn't have a name. She's just there to be ogled.
She's Curly's girlfriend, I guess. But yeah, no, we don't know who she is really. So this is followed by the sequence where Aunt Edna decides they're going to go visit the Gorts.
Yeah.
Because they had sent them those packages during
Sequence
the
is
war.
So good.
Now, outside the court's house, there's a sign which says no hawkers, no salespeople, no coloreds. Immediately, a colored mailman comes up and delivers some, and she sprays them down, the mail when it comes in. Fine. Okay, good. Okay, but are we criticizing these people for being racist, but are we okay with Barry telling that taxi driver to go back to Israel? I don't understand what this movie is trying to... Does it try to have it both ways? Is it saying Barry's racism is legit and these people are not because they're upper class? I don't know what's happening. I don't understand what the criticism or joke is.
You are absolutely correct to be baffled by this, because Barry is unambiguously the hero.
Yeah.
And these people are the villains,
yeah.
Yet they're both racist.
Yeah.
So are there grades of racism?
And we have to put up with his comments about Hong Kong. And
is anti-Semitism okay?
Yeah. Exactly.
And anti-black racism not?
Yeah.
Is that the conclusion we're supposed to draw?
Yes.
I agree with you here.
Okay, so we get to see him at the courts. This all works pretty well, and it's like the comic. There's some great lines from Barry Humphries where she talks about how she on Edna talks about how she likes Shakespeare, the plays, especially To Be or Not to Be, and Lend Me Your Ears. I love this. Anytime Barry Humphries his scenes were actually pretty good. Most of the time, they were pretty funny.
Yeah, he can act.
The scene in the den plays out.
It's exactly like the comic, and it's fantastic. The guy playing Mr. Gord, whose name escapes me, I looked him up. An actor with a lengthy and successful career in British cinema, television, and stage.
Okay.
Here at the end, kind of his life, very much a dissolute kind of alcoholic by this stage.
Right.
His arm's in a cast sometimes because he fell over because he was so drunk.
Okay.
There's a scene where he falls asleep on the couch. Hilarious scene. He really fell asleep on the couch.
Okay.
Because he was such an old... But but nonetheless a professional. Learned all his lines. Once the camera was rolling, I mean, he's exactly like... He looks exactly like Mr. Gord.
Yes.
I think Mr. Gord is this actor... I have to look up his name, but this is the best, like, physically... Visually, the best casting since Waltrow in De Bevechte Man. Like, he looks just like Mr. Gord.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic. And he does such a good job. Like, they go into the den's all dark. He's got, like, a candle or a torch. He uses it to light himself up, and he's wearing the schoolboy uniform.
Yes.
And he's like, you call me boy, and I'll call you sir.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now give me six of the best.
Call me Gort, he says. Call me Gort.
I've spilt ink all over your lovely study floor. Thrash me. It's all my fault.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my hat indoors.
And I will say, like, even though the movie has no plot, really, there's kind of some good carry-through of, like, when the thing with the daughter falls apart, he's like, it's all my fault, I need to be punished.
Yeah.
And at the end of the movie, we see them watching TV when Barry's on TV exposing himself.
Yep.
We actually get a view of their living room. So it's actually a good kind of tie together of that kind of stuff. Okay, so they go to the dance, as in the comic. He meets some Australians there. They're in the back room, agriculturalists, we're told. This is the most...
They're from the local agricultural college.
The second most beer scene in the movie. There's...
Every time anyone opens a Foster's, they've shaken it up. So that
almost in like a shaking, like one of those machines to deliberately shoot like it way up.
It goes 2-3 meters in the air every time they. And
everybody's just covered in it. It's just wasted. I think they love the Fosters. Why are they happy to spill it on the floor? Anyway,
because they're booze.
Yes. So he comes back. He makes out with her. She's actually kind of into it in the movie.
She was into it in the comic.
I think she
adopted the Australianisms very enthusiastically.
That's true. A lot of them, yes.
But with the malapropism, she keeps messing them up.
Yes. Now, this was a thing that actually bothered me in this strip. So if somebody says, instead of saying fair dinkum, says fair deacum, are you supposed to laugh at that? Because fair dinkum is not a real expression, if you know what I mean. There's no true derivation of it. It's not something where if somebody got it wrong, you'd be like, you're an idiot. It's like something that's made up in the first place. Do you know what I mean? But it seems like every time a character says fair dorkum or something, we're supposed to be like, that idiot doesn't know the right expression. Or I don't know what to make of this, because again, as you said, it was for a British audience.
It's weird. It's weird that the Poms that get carried away, they get carried away kind of like by the raw exuberance of the Australians, I suppose.
Mm.
And they start yelling out things like fair dinkum.
Right.
And bonza.
Right.
And wacko the diddley-o. which is something
Yes,
that
you keep saying that.
never heard that in my life. But and yet as you say, if you hear Wacko the Diddly-O once, you're not going to have any trouble saying it again.
Yeah, but even if you did, would you make fun of that person for saying it wrong?
It's just saying something about how Humphries is saying something here. I don't know exactly what he's saying.
This is what I'm getting at.
Something about the vacuous adoption of the exotic.
Oh, okay.
Without understanding it.
Right. Okay, so when they come into the house, the parents are like, "Oh, you didn't play hospitals," and they assume that that he didn't propose, and they assume this means that they have lost the fortune.
Yeah, they're ruined because.
But they didn't. I don't understand the logic here of how this scene is playing out. Why assume that he's not going to propose for tomorrow or next week or next month?
Because they're lunatics.
Right.
The mother's mad. The father just wants to be punished.
Right.
And poor old Susan just wants to suck her thumb.
Right. Okay.
And they all get committed after this, apparently. Like, there's a line a little later in the film that Aunt Edna has to call the hospital and get them all carried away.
Oh, I see.
Because they've had a nervous breakdown.
I see, okay. Okay, I guess that's acceptable. So he runs away, he hitchhikes, he picks up by the van with the folk band, which doesn't seem very much folky in the movie. The main member of the band is played by Barry Humphries again.
Yep.
Hoot, I think his name
is.
Yeah, Hoot. In this version...
It's called the VW Beetle... Sorry, the VW van that they're driving around in is called the Judas Iscariot Chariot.
Yes. Yes.
Just a cool name.
So it kind of plays out a bit like the comic. They hear him sing this song of vomiting on the beach.
No. It's the One-Eyed Trouser Snake song.
That's right. Okay. All right. They hear this, and they're like, "Oh, we can exploit this guy," and they're all three of them are in on it.
Yes.
It's not. I think she's more innocent in the comic strip,
right,
as I recall.
Incidentally, the One-Eyed Trouser Snake song, when Barry Humphries was appearing in Oliver, the musical, which was one of his big breaks in the 60s, he actually started writing a Barry McKenzie musical.
Okay.
And this is one of the songs from this stillborn musical that he handed over to Bruce Beresford when they were writing the film as kind of material that they could use to develop the movie.
Got it. There's, again, so they get back to their love nest, their hippie love nest, you could call it. There's a moment here where I realized, again, it was always Barry Humphries' lines where he says something, we can get a lot of money out of him in this racket, this idiom. He corrects himself.
Yeah, that's good.
So they take him to the gig. There's where he sings the Chunder song.
It's like the Cavern. It's like the Beatles. It's like that club the Beatles used to play in.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bricked-in kind of underground venue. Yeah, he sings the Chundering in the deep Pacific, the big Pacific Sea. Mm-hmm. It's recorded by Humphries. Yeah. Then the film.
Yes.
The producer shows up. He wants to sign
the big label producer.
The big
guy.
cheese.
Yeah.
The girl promptly abandons. It looked like she was maybe going to fraternize with Barry.
I think that was in the comic too.
It was more explicit in the comic.
Yeah.
Because she says something like, "I thought you'd never ask" in the comic, and she's like dragging him outside.
Yeah.
Here it's a little less clear, but she promptly drops him because she wants to be groomed.
Yes.
By this guy.
Yes.
He's escorted by these enormous chauffeurs.
Yeah.
Who are kind of like his muscle.
Yeah.
There's quite a funny sequence where Barry Humphries and this kind of like Scottish tough who is a member of one of these three people try to put the screws on the producer, and he just buys them off with a roll of cash instantly.
Yes.
And they're like, "Oh, I guess this will cover it, man."
Yeah. But they say something like, "We want to bring our music to people, and this will do it," or something like that. Like they have some hypocritical.
What about bringing down the system as he's taking this huge wad of money?
Yeah.
But I think the Scott Spot guy sees Barry trying to put the moves on the girl.
That's right.
And he says, "I'm going to scratch him." There are a lot of direct quotes from the comic.
Yeah.
Like word for word lines from the comic. He says, "I'm going to scratch him." He gets out a switchblade. There's a big fight, like in the comic. And again, amusingly, the producer gets one of his toughs to recover the roll.
Yes.
And Barry wakes up in the hospital.
Yes, but first he has a dream that he's a convict in the desert.
Where was this shot?
I don't know, but he dreams he was a convict and he's being hunted by like an Aboriginal band.
Yep.
like a tribe.
And we got the didgeridoo. He's wearing like convict outfit. He's got arrows on his pants.
Yeah.
This must have been shot in Sydney.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because it certainly wasn't shot in London.
They've done some color processing to make it look like.
But it's the sand.
On the beach.
On the beach, probably. Yeah. And because there's Indigenous people, it must have been in Sydney.
Yes, absolutely. He wakes up in the hospital. He's actually got a brown doctor.
Yeah.
And which I guess is why he confused him for an Aboriginal. I guess that was the joke. Now, the doctor can't deal with him or understand what he's saying, so he's sent to the psychiatrist, Dr. DeLamphrey, as in the comic.
Yeah.
We get a lot of
Barry Humphries.
Now, this is the first time we get puke in the movie.
Is Barry Humphries an all-star for playing 3 roles in one movie?
Technically speaking, I guess he is.
Oh dear.
If he plays more different roles...
Well, he'll be back next week. He'll be back next week, that's for sure.
So, yeah, we get the puke on the head. Now, the whole time in this movie, I have to say, I was like, this movie is tame compared to the comic. Because he talks about peeing all the time, he's drinking all the time, but the puking isn't happening.
Now we've got some puking.
And I was like, well, where's all the puke? We need some, like, what was Mr. Creosote from Meaning of Life? I was like, that's what the level this movie's supposed to be at. When it finally happened, I was like, this is so gross.
Yeah. Apparently, Humphries is a connoisseur of fake vomit.
Okay.
He's on record as saying that he thinks this is the first most explicit instance of vomiting to occur in a movie.
Oh.
Anywhere.
Interesting.
He thinks. When, as a younger man, as a kind of like edgy Dadaist comedian, Humphries used to make his own fake vomit and just eat it, like on public transport.
Okay.
Like he'd catch a tram and eat vomit out of a bag.
Huh. Okay.
So he has these recipes. Okay. Apparently, if you buy the if you buy the DVD of the 2 movies, there's a making of, and he will give you his recipe.
Wow.
For how to make authentic chunda.
It worked. It was so gross.
It looks disgusting.
And I was like,
what do they call it in the comics? Sweet corn and tomatoes.
Yeah, they say it all the time. Yeah. There are a few other expressions for it too, but that is one of them. Okay, so now he, again, this, Edna works a bit like the telegrams in the comic.
Right.
She shows up to introduce a new plotline. Okay, we need to see this girl Gayleen, because her mom's worried about her. She's been living in the UK for 2 years. They go over to see Gayleen, who's now calling herself Leslie, which they assume is because she wants to sound more British. They go over there, and she opens a door, and Barry's like, that bloke is actually a Sheila, or something like that. Here we have a situation which is maybe the worst since Katrina McCall in Lady Oscar, where you have this extremely attractive...
Very beautiful woman.
She doesn't look like she's dressed like a man. She's got her hair in a bun. You would never, for a split second, assume this was a man.
I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
It does not make any sense. I was just like, couldn't you play the scene in a different way? Dress her differently?
Isn't it just enough that she's not wearing a dress is enough for us to allegedly
think that she
be weirded out?
Confused? Yeah.
In a film where Barry Humphries is in drag for half the runtime?
I did wonder if there was like a kind of there's moments where it seems like they're playing with the fact that Humphries is in drag.
Right.
And I don't know if we were getting to that here, but...
No, I think they're just...
So as in the comic...
They should have played this scene differently.
Yeah, so as in the comic, Leslie/Gayleen is living with an older woman that dresses as a man.
Yes. Almost a convincing man. Because this is an older woman, another storied British actor with a lengthy career on stage and screen. Pretty good. Instantly.
Yeah, I actually thought she was pretty good.
She's great actor.
Yeah.
She immediately starts, I suppose, hitting on Aunt Edna.
She seems to be like a hornbag. Like, she also hits on a very young woman at the TV studio at the end.
Right. Yes,
like, immediately starts coming on to her, like, oh, you want to go back to my place kind of thing.
Or she's just eager to... I don't know. Is she horny or is she just eager to...
Don't know.
Induct?
Really hard to figure out what's... Yeah.
Amusingly, their home is called Radcliffe Hall.
Right.
Radcliffe Hall is a famous author of lesbian romance.
Oh, okay.
They make it slightly more obvious because the older woman asks Aunt Edna, has she ever read Well of Lonely? She has a copy of Well of Lonely, and that's, of course, by Radcliffe Hall.
Okay.
So that was really funny. Yeah.
There's also a funny bit in here where that woman and Edna are sitting on the sofa, and the woman says to her, London is full of sex freaks. And Barry Humphries looks out the window at the street. They framed it so he can look right out the street. And I thought it was such a great, again, another great Barry Humphries moment in this movie that was maybe not even scripted. Okay, so Galen / Leslie takes Barry out to this drag bar.
Barry says that he needs some Fosters, but they don't have any. He won't drink anything except Fosters. They've got gin or like sherry.
Yeah.
He's not about it. So he says to Leslie, "Well, how about you and I go down the Rubbity, the pub, Rub-a-dub pub,
Oh,
Rubbity."
I never got that. Okay.
And
I was wondering every time. I was like, "What is Rubbity?"
And sink a few tubes of the amber liquid. And she's very quickly kind of like her lesbianism, bisexualism, transvestitism is being eroded by the rugged machismo of Barry.
Right.
She very quickly says, "Oh yeah, let's go." She very quickly kind of becomes a female Barry.
Yeah, so he needs to take a leak. This happens in the comics. He goes into the bathroom, and when he goes there, a cop tries to arrest, like a plainclothes detective tries to arrest him.
This happens in the comic.
For being...
Okay, it's not made clear, but from context, I would say, when the comic first came out, he was being arrested for being gay. Because it was still a crime.
Yeah.
I think it was decriminalised... I've written it. It was decriminalised in 1967.
Right.
Homosexuality in the UK. So when the comic first came out, it was still a crime to be gay.
Right.
So this is a vice cop.
Right.
Undercover trying to bust gay people.
Right. And it plays weird because especially in the movie, I didn't notice so much in the comic, but in the movie, he's in a gay bar full of gay
Well, it's funny.
men dressed as women. I maybe can't tell that
I
they're
like
men
this.
dressed...
I like this.
I didn't mind it too.
The point is that he's a scumbag vice cop. So he's lurking around loose, trying to arrest people just for being the way they are.
Yes.
So and also he arrests the only guy in the pub that's not a transvestite.
That's right.
Because everyone else in the pub, including Leslie, is in drag.
Yes.
Barry's the only one that isn't.
Yes.
He follows him into the dunny, makes him open his bag.
Which he's accidentally swapped with Aunt Edna's
They
bag.
both have a Qantas bag.
They both have Qantas
It goes
bags.
right back to the start of the movie, which is a nice touch.
Yeah.
Because Auntie Edna buys him a Qantas bag in the very first scene.
Yeah.
And it's got, pearls and a blue dress in it. And he says, "Well, what's this then?" As if having a dress in your bag meant that it was proof that you were gay.
Yeah.
Homosexuality, but whatever. Made more, It's alternative lifestyles associated with one another.
Yes, exactly.
What made more sense in the early 60s than it did in the early 70s, but whatever, I think. So, Barry, in the film, as in the comic, he says, I'll prove you these aren't mine, I'll put them on, you'll see they don't fit.
Yeah. Yes.
So
and then they fit.
And they fit perfectly.
And it plays exactly like in the comic, yeah.
And then the guy says, "You're under arrest."
Yeah.
Barry says, "You're going to have to catch me first," shoves him, runs out, past all the men in drag. Leslie follows him. He runs left. The vice cop comes out. "Where did he go?" All the men in drag say, "He went that way," pointing the opposite direction in their deep voices.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, this is not the last scene with this cop.
Unfortunately,
He's in the
this
rest
is
of the
why I
movie.
brought him up. He is used as comic relief, much like those guys in Nicky Larson, who are just constantly hanging around. He's constantly getting doors slammed in his face. Yep. Like, okay, we didn't need this. In the comic, he disappears.
Yep.
I don't think we see him again.
No, we didn't need him. However, I'm okay with it because he's scum.
Okay, so while they're on the run, they go into the subway thinking it's a cinema, as in the comic. It's not quite as funny because we don't get commentary.
We don't get that
narrator,
gap.
yeah.
We don't get a week's gap.
Yeah.
It just happens straight away. Struth, this is a subway.
Yes. Yeah.
Why even include that joke then?
But they do meet Dominic down there.
Yep. Played by Peter Cook.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And
apparently seldomly sober. They had to do all his scenes in the morning.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
Everyone's drunk in this movie.
Wow.
They did all his scenes. Apparently after midday he was useless.
Yeah.
Well, he was very nervous, apparently, because he didn't actually do a lot of this kind of acting. He was mostly kind of like a personality,
right.
hosting radio and television shows.
So he wants Barry in his documentary about Australians living in the UK.
Yep.
He shows up at the station. He calls all his friends over because he's going to be on TV.
Yep, and they have booze.
He goes up. He's interviewed by this lady who he misunderstands something she said about... This
is a famous talking head in the UK.
Okay.
So this is a real figure, this lady. She's asking him questions, regular questions, and he's answering in incomprehensible slang gibberish.
Yep.
And she says, "I don't see your point."
Right.
Which he takes, and he's already in the train. He already thinks Dominic is interested in his quote unquote old fella.
Right.
So he says, "You don't see me point. Oh well, cop a gander at this then."
Probably cop a deco. I'm guessing he said.
Deco gander. He doesn't say deco, but he does say.
He does say deco once in the movie at some stage.
Anyway, he drops his strides, and we don't see anything. We just sort of see his legs. We sort of see his knees. And but we do see his bum.
We see his bare butt,
Yep. And Dominic's thrilled.
Yeah, but there's some chaos and a fire starts in the studio.
Yes. Well, all the Aussies are thrilled. They're like, "Yeah, way to go, Bazza, you magnificent bastard!"
Yeah.
All the Aussies call one another
and he's
bastard.
Barry's very proud of his TV appearance at this stage.
Yeah.
Then they piss out the fire.
He's not even on drugs like he was in the comic.
He's like, "Oh, I did an awesome job." They piss out the fire. And
they do a bucket brigade, but with cans of Fosters.
Yes.
And they sing a little song. And instead of pouring the Fosters on the fire, they drink the Fosters and
then pee on
and then urinate.
Why?
Because it's funny.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, narratively, it's funnier than the logical choice.
Obviously.
But
we get some flashbacks to some of the other characters.
But we have to see all these guys like pissing over this wall.
Yeah. Well, they're not. Yeah, they're just sort of standing there with their groins lowered below camera, and we got water. What's plainly water shooting out over. Yeah. They piss on the vice cop.
Yeah.
We see various characters that we've met throughout the film reacting to seeing Barry on TV. We see the Gorts. They're outraged and angry. We see
the psychiatrist. Himself.
He's been committed himself, and he's being given an enormous needle, which he was recommending be used on Barry earlier. We see the two hippies who are in traction.
Yes.
Because they've been completely beat up.
Yes, and now after Barry's pulled away from the detective on Edna, he's still trying to arrest him and having doors slammed in his face. Barry suddenly at the end feels regret about what he did.
Yeah, why? Because he did it in the comic.
And then Edna's like, "Okay, I'm taking you back to Australia."
Well,
and then we get a shot of Curly looking at them sadly.
I don't understand.
Why?
Yeah,
did this movie earn Curly being sad about him flying back to Australia?
First of all, Dominic says, as he did in the comic, that everyone's so excited by the bold, provocative gesture of Barry getting his dick out on camera that they're going to offer him a TV series. And we never find out what Barry's reaction to that is, because Edna says he's not getting a series, he's getting back on a plane, straight back to Sydney, where he belongs. She puts him on the train, we get that weird shot of Curly
looking sad.
And then they're flying back to Australia on a Qantas flight, and Baz turns to Aunt Edna and says, I was just starting to light the Poms. And that's where the film ends. Then we get the theme song. The Adventures of Barry McKenzie.
Yeah, we have things much like Fatty Finn. There's an actual song to go along with this one.
Yeah, cool song. It was actually a hit.
What?
Yeah.
So I don't get... I mean, I understand why Curly is sad, but I don't think it has any place in this movie.
No.
I don't understand why Barry's suddenly regretful after being proud of his achievement of showing his dong on TV one scene earlier.
It's because he was in the comic. Because in the comic he sobers up. He comes down off the pill, and then he's embarrassed by what he did.
Right.
Here, they haven't done that, but because it kind of slavishly follows these vignettes from start to finish, it just happens.
Yeah.
I don't think they've just... We'll talk about this when we get to adaptation. Yeah. But then roll credits. With the song playing over it, we get...
and a freeze of Barry's face for the whole credits. It doesn't fade to black. It's just like... Or maybe it does at some stage.
Well, we get the Dune 1984
Oh yeah,
treatment.
that was good. I like that actually.
Yeah.
I like knowing who the because actually in the end credits it just gives a list of names. It doesn't tell what characters they play.
We see in profile the characters and the names of the actors that played them.
Yeah.
And 3 times Barry Humphries.
Yeah.
Instead of like once with maybe his 3 roles
Yeah.
partitioned.
Yeah.
No. We get 3 separate shots of Barry Humphries with his 3 roles.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you help?
I have seen that in other movies where actors play multiple parts. It's kind of like a joke.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
But yeah. Okay, let's do trivia, I guess.
Well, okay. As I said, this film was funded solely by a grant from the Australian government.
Yep.
$250,000.
Yep.
They were reluctant to give it. At this point in his career, Bruce Beresford was not the story director that he is now. In fact, he hadn't directed a feature film. They were reluctant to give it to him. However, they were eventually persuaded when they said they would attract money from other sources, which they never did. As I mentioned, it did very well in Australia.
Okay.
It made at least $1 million in Australia and apparently paid back the loan within 3 months
Okay.
of release,
Okay.
which is pretty good. Not very successful in other markets. It did very well in London. Apparently broke records.
Well, speaking for myself in 2024, it's unintelligible in other markets. And I mean, I can't imagine trying to sell to a non-English country,
Yeah.
trying to be the translator on this thing and trying to understand what he's saying would be a nightmare.
Yes. The producer on this film was Philip Adams.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of Philip Adams, but he's quite a famous Australian public intellectual.
Okay.
Kind of like a left-wing columnist.
Mm-hmm.
He worked for many years in the advertising industry, and he had a very prominent role in the 1970s in Australian cinema, producing films like this. He was one of the people that persuaded that Prime Minister I mentioned, John Gorton, to establish this commission that ended up funding the film. Philip Adams, you might be interested to hear, Kumar, went to Eltham High.
Oh, right around the corner from us.
Right around the corner from us, where your son and my son go.
Huh.
Also, I went there. There's a literary prize given to Year 12s, or there was when I was there, for a writing prize given to...
Okay.
Given
The Philip Adams Prize.
The Philip Adams Award.
Okay.
I won it in 1999.
Wow.
And look at me now.
Yeah.
Anyway, he produced and he handled the distribution for the film himself.
Right.
Which is something he had done for earlier films that he did. At first. Later on, the distribution was taken over by Roadshow. He did attempt to have it to handle the distribution to other markets. America, Europe, even Canada. He expressed special regret that he couldn't get it distributed in Canada. I don't know why he thought it would do well there.
I don't know. You know... Okay, let's go through the trivia first.
All right. When he tried to get it... This is apocryphal. But allegedly when he showed it to American kind of like Hollywood movie people, one of them said to him, "Remake it with Jerry Lewis and you've got yourself a deal." Yeah. It was filmed, as you pointed out, in London, Hong Kong and Sydney. A 4-week shoot. 5 weeks if you include the trip over.
Right.
It was shot in January of 1972. And as I said, Philip Adams described it as a guerrilla production because they were shooting under the radar because they not only did not apply for work permits for the Australian crew, so they had no right to be working in the UK. They also were using non-union labour and they applied for no shooting permits. Hence why they were hustled off that Soho shot at the sex shop before they could get that footage of that.
Right.
That conservative politician leaving.
Right.
That's pretty much it I've got for trivia.
Okay. Well, I've got about an hour of things I need to talk about.
Let's go.
So I was thinking about a lot of things during our discussion. As I mentioned, it was my 20th anniversary in Australia last month.
Very appropriate that we're doing this film.
Very appropriate, but also came loaded with associations. I remember when I arrived, I actually, before you started recording, I'm like, we're going to have to cut half this episode because I'm going to say a lot of stuff that just cannot be on tape. But we were getting invited to, I landed at the end of December, and I remember that January, it was just every weekend there were like 2 barbecues. Georgina's old friends were like, hey, you're back in the country. Come
and have a Foster's.
Come over to these barbecues.
Not that anyone drinks Foster's.
Now, I'll come around to that. It was, now I'm an introvert. This was very difficult for me. I didn't know any of these people. It was a real struggle to go to 1 to 2 barbecues every weekend. I'm
sure.
It was summertime.
I'd hate that myself, and I'm only slightly less introverted than you are.
And then they would say, what do? I'd say, I'm a manga translator. They'd say, oh, that's porn stuff. I would have this conversation multiple times. That porn stuff multiple times, and I was just going crazy, and there were all these negative associations around this. And I used to be, when I was living in Japan, from 98 to 2004, a semi-heavy drinker, a young man who drank a lot. And I came to Australia and I went to these barbecues. I went to one where there were these kids, what do they call that, the special schools, Montessori or whatever?
Right.
I'd never heard of this before I came to Australia, but suddenly I was meeting all these kids. And we went to this one party where this kid was going around poking other kids with a stick, and they were like, oh, he goes to a Montessori school. Also, somebody at the same party had made some pot brownies, and the kids had gotten into them.
What?
And I was like,
this is beyond the pale.
what is this country? What is this country? And also, if
only you'd watched The Adventures of Barry McKenzie.
And also, people were drinking a lot, and I was like, I'm gonna. And also another thing, I go to all these barbecues. They're like, what team do you like?
What football team?
What football? I was like, fuck off. So I was everything. It was a perfect storm of I don't like any of this. And these people were drinking a lot, and I'm like, I'm out. I reduced my drinking hugely at the time. Now, 20 years later, coming around to this comic and movie, I was surprised there was not a lot of sports in this.
Yeah. Actually,
in the movie, there's in the opening shot, he tries to pack his cricket bat into a suitcase, and that's it.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I really tried to be positive about this comic, and so I was really trying very hard. And I appreciated the writing of the comic, for sure. But something wasn't... And also, I'm being hypocritical, because what's the other Mackenzie? It's Bob and Doug, Strange Brew. Here's 2 beer-swilling Canadians who, at the end of that movie, one of them ends up in a tank and has to drink all the beer, and comes out, he's like 20 feet around, this ridiculous shot, and then he has to he had to piss it out to turn normal again.
Yes, and you like this movie,
and I like this movie. Yeah. So
this is the Canadian Barry McKenzie.
Exactly. Well,
sort
is
of.
it?
Sort of. Well, it's how I believe it's how I sold it to you, right?
Right.
I said this is Barry McKenzie is the Australian Strange Brew. Incidentally, Kumar, I had never seen Barry McKenzie before this week.
Right.
So I was making that claim in ignorance.
Okay.
I just knew that it was about a beer swilling ochre.
Right.
And I figure...
And his name is Mackenzie.
Yeah, Mackenzie. And, like, an ochre is kind of like these... I don't know what you would call this, a Canadian archetype.
Hosers. No, they accuse other people of being hosers.
They accuse other people of being hosers. Yes, they do. But I just thought,
So why... Am I being hypocritical in saying one is okay and the other is not?
Well, that's... what will determine, I suppose, when we come to
now, here's another tangent I want to go on. Why was this not sold to Canada? Why was Crocodile Dundee such a huge, massive hit in North America and Europe, and not this movie?
Good question.
What is it specifically about that character that is more likable in some way? There's some of the same transphobia in Crocodile Dundee as there is here, and there it's like, well, I guess, I don't know if we'd laugh about it now, but certainly in the 80s it was like, oh, this guy's so ignorant, he doesn't realize this is a man in drag.
The film, Beresford, Humphries, Adams, I think, I don't know about Philip Adams, but Beresford and Humphries certainly in the documentary that's included on the DVD, the 2-disc DVD for both this one and the sequel, they said that they felt that Crocodile Dundee existed because of Barry McKenzie. It's the same, which is a bit rich. Yeah, but
Crocodile Dundee is from the country. He's from the outback.
The thing is, that's a bit rich. It reminded me a bit... no one is going to get this reference. but it reminded me a bit of the DS9 documentary.
Okay,
Do you remember? It's called What We Leave Behind or something
Yeah, I
like
think
that?
so, yeah.
Where IR-11 just talks about the incredible influence that Deep Space Nine had
Sure.
on all sci-fi
Yeah.
to appear then and since.
Sure. Well, Jodorowsky's Dune,
Same.
same. They're like, this is such a hugely influential, unmade movie.
And it's just not.
Yeah.
These people are the heroes of their own stories. I understand that. They think they invented the story of the Innocent Abroad?
Yeah.
Of Mr. Deeds Goes to Washington? You know, of Don Quixote?
Yeah.
They think they invented that? Picaresque? They did not.
No.
Dundee's
not a drunk.
No, he's not a drunk.
Obsessed with vomiting.
He's not a racist. He's not obsessed with his bodily fluids. Crocodile Dundee has a story.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
This doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? Why
Think about how, like, the lens cap scene in Dundee plays versus the scene with the Aboriginal hunters in this movie. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that's 10 years later, but I don't know.
Look, Dundee has its own problems. It's full of stereotypes too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the 4 sequels are proof of how the concept didn't really have legs.
Yeah, for sure. But, okay, is this film offensive? Dundee's not offensive, right?
No.
Barely. It's only offensive if, I guess, you resent kind of like the impression that we're all crocodile leather wearing weirdos from the bush.
But I think it's specific that he's a guy from the bush. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, we see Sydney and stuff. He doesn't even really know what to do in Sydney.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. The question here is Barry McKenzie offensive? We've been skating around it.
Yeah.
We've got all the bodily humor. We've got all the bodily fluids, all that stuff.
That's kind of fine. It's gross, but it's fine.
Yes.
I don't find it offensive. I think there are offensive elements in it. I think the homophobia, the racism.
Yeah.
I mean...
Those are the two main...
Yeah.
I would say those are my biggest... And sexism.
Yes.
Homophobia, racism, sexism.
Yeah.
Those are my biggest problems with the film. I feel like it's even worse in the film than it is in the comic because it's compressed in the film. Especially with the gay bashing.
Yeah.
We get constant talk about poofters.
Yeah.
I'm not a poofter.
What year was the Bruce's Philosopher sketch from Monty Python? Where they talk about poofters all the time. That must have been like 68 or...
Yeah, Humphries reckons that Barry McKenzie inspired the...
Oh, so that came after?
Yeah, it did come after. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Look, again, Humphries is tooting his own horn here. Who knows? It seems unlikely.
Okay.
Was that the only impression? Was the only impression that English people had of Australians was this? I mean, admittedly popular comic in a mildly popular muckraking rag. But to return to that topic again, it's relentless, the homophobia. We have these admittedly less frequent but still pretty unpleasant racist remarks. Gypsies are mentioned, Jippos are mentioned.
Yeah.
The anti-Semitic
Fortunately,
comments.
we do not get that specific term about taking a shit in the movie. That was a relief.
That was just in the... I guess that was beyond the pale. So the question is, the makers of the film in this documentary that I mentioned, which I didn't watch but I read a synopsis of, they insist over and over that they were ridiculing aquaculture.
Huh. Okay.
That the character of Barry McKenzie is supposed to be ridiculous.
Okay.
And that we're supposed to hate, we're supposed to judge him, we're supposed to laugh at him, not with him.
Then we need another character in the movie that's presenting that point of view.
I agree. Here's the problem. When you don't have that, what you mentioned, another character, or you don't have the voice of reason, your character is not... If you leave it unspoken the way this film does, then your character is not satirizing a stereotype, it's performing it. It's playing it straight. Barry is the hero of this movie, so when he says these offensive things, we laugh with him, not at him. He's unambiguously heroic, right?
Yeah.
And we don't get enough of the voice of reason for us to say, this is satire.
Yeah.
This is silly.
Yeah.
That, I think, is the problem with this movie. Philip Adams himself wrote about this. He wrote about the movie The Clockwork Orange. He said, quote, "Audiences often take what is intended as critical as celebratory."
So he's blaming the audience.
No, he was blaming the film.
Right. Oh.
But also the audience.
Yeah.
Right. He's saying that A Clockwork Orange, he said, was a dangerous film
Right.
because the satire wasn't clear enough, and that people watching it would see what was supposed to be criticised, the violence in this case, as celebrating the violence by performing it. I think that's what's going on here. We're celebrating, and that apparently may be part of the secret why this film was so successful. Because people enjoyed going, I don't know, there's really not a lot of information about even how successful it was, but did people go and see this movie and laugh at seeing themselves
up on screen?
Yes.
That's me on screen.
Yes, yeah. And maybe that's why it didn't do well in England outside of London, because it only did well in London.
Right. I think this is going to be. I think we're going to get back to this next week, because I think there's some kind of shift going on here between let's ban these books. There's cultural cringe. There's Australian ugliness. And then this movie comes out, and then there's somehow a shift where we're going to have a sequel. It's successful. We've got figures of authority in the sequel.
Yep. Yes. Gough Whitlam is in the sequel.
Right. So
one of my heroes.
We've got a huge shift to this is who we are. Let's celebrate it.
I'm curious to see what the sequel is like. Beresford says that the sequel's a much better film.
Interesting.
He thinks so. He's not really happy that he did either of these movies. He's gone on record numerous times since saying that they damaged his career. That he, for a time, this is like in the early 70s, people saw him as that guy that did those Yobbo movies. I don't know. We're talking about a very narrow window here.
Yeah.
When did, like, Barry McKenzie Holds His Own came out in 74. Don's Party, a classic Australian New Wave film, came out in 76.
Okay.
Well, we're talking 2 years?
Yeah.
What, 2 years when you were embarrassed at parties?
Yeah.
At barbecues? People said, hey, you're that porn guy.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, I'm looking forward to next week, and that brings us to our votes.
Okay. I really, coming into this, did not know how I was going to vote on any of these.
Okay.
Because again, I don't know, because my mind is in that place of 20th anniversary, and I was trying to be positive about it.
I appreciate it.
And I wasn't sure if I was being hard on it, I was being unfair with it, or... Okay, I think the comic is a good comic, but there are things that are unforgivable about it. You can't get it anyway.
That's right. It's not in print.
It's not in print. I think some people will get... It's not for everybody. So I'm going to give it a conditional yay.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you listen to the podcast and you've heard what it sounds like, then maybe you can seek out these books. You won't find them online anywhere. You got to buy these things in physical copies to read them. You might get something out of them. They are funny if you can hold down your lunch while you're getting through the offensive bits. And if you're a specific kind of person, if you are Australian or English, you might get something out of this. That's what I will say about it.
Cool. I'm also going to say yay, a slightly more enthusiastic yay than you. I don't like Barry Humphries, as I said. Mm-hmm. I don't like his comedy. I don't like that trend he represented, now dying out. Australian entertainers now just go to America just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. But there was a time when they went to England and sneered at where they came from and made bank.
Right. By the way... Sorry, go ahead.
Having said that, these comics made me laugh a lot.
Yeah.
Look, remember, this was published in a kind of grotty gossip mag in the early 60s, and then you have this comic about a clearly ridiculous character saying these most marvelous things, some of which you can't tell, some of which you almost recognise even as a 21st century Australian, some of which you know are real, but you're not quite sure, and some of which seem patently ridiculous, but could be true. The wordplay amuses me no end. I found the stories, I don't really think much of them. Sometimes they were a struggle to get through. But it's like Pogo. Individual panels are a joy.
Yeah. We didn't talk about Nicholas Scarlin's art. It's actually great. It's
great art
really
too.
great. Very detailed, brisk, really amazingly well done.
Yep, great art.
Yeah.
Every now and again there'll be a panel where we just see, it seems to be when Baz is walking into a pub and we just sort of see him from under his chin.
A dark, like shadowy, strange image.
With those?
Very moody, very weird,
amazing
atmospheric panel once in a while.
So, despite those reservations as stated, I will say yay for the comic.
Yes, but I think that wordplay does depend on you being Australian to get it.
It's interesting for a comic written for English people.
Yeah. Or, I mean, you have to be
It was
either
banned,
English.
as you said, it was banned in Australia.
If you were living in London and you knew Australians, the
Right.
strip would make sense to you.
Right. Yes. Yes,
Or
because
if you
Earl's
were-
Court really was full of Australians in those days.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, the movie, I'm gonna go nay. I did laugh at some bits, but it was, God, I don't know, it was just so, I was complaining about how, like, it wasn't as full on as the comic, but it was still too much. And all that repetition in an hour and a half is supposed to be once every 2 weeks.
Yep.
I don't know. It wasn't working for me. I was really struggling with it, grossed out by it, all that stuff. I didn't even the scene where they're all peeing. I didn't like the detective being peed on. I know it's fake pee, but I was just like, I don't like this.
He deserved it. He was a vice cop.
Yeah.
Trying to lock up people just for
That's
being gay.
true. That's true, but it was just weirdly
Look, this
gross.
is
And it seemed to be, I couldn't tell if it wanted it both ways, as I said before. Was it trying to laud Barry, while at the same time, was it even criticizing him much compared to the comic? I think the comic is much harsher on Barry than the movie is.
Yep, I agree with that. Look, this is actually kind of a celebrated film.
Right. Yeah.
Just it may not be the seminal, influential work that its boosters insist it is. That book, the Barry McKenzie movies that you gave me, I read it. I read about half of it. It's so unashaming in its boosterism, and it's frankly ludicrous, fulsome, overblown praise for the film. That's absurd. It's invoking all these literary theories to describe how avant-garde and clever it is. Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Having said that, this is considered something of a seminal Australian movie. I came in, like you, from my own circumstances. I've obviously been in Australia longer than 20 years. It's more like 45. I came in wanting to like it as well. For me, Kumar, it's also a nay. It's just not that good.
Yeah.
As you said, it's not very well plotted.
Yeah. But as I said, I didn't mind that.
I on the other hand, didn't really like that. I feel like you can watch it, and if you're enamored of the wordplay, I suppose the controversy, the provocative scenes,
Yeah.
the spewing, the silliness, then you kind of look past. You don't see what is essentially kind of like a not very well made movie.
You know what? If you like the language of the comic, the movie doesn't work because you can't stop and read it like Pogo, right? It just flies past you.
Yes.
And for me, I had the subtitles on. If I didn't, I wouldn't. There's a scene where when he goes to that bar, Curly says to him, "There's a lot of blokes here from Perry Bloody Mata." Para Bloody Mata?
Yeah, Para Bloody Mata. What's that mean?
What would, if you didn't have the subtitle on?
What was
You're
Perry
screwed.
Bloody
You're
Mata?
screwed.
I had
Absolutely screwed.
I had to put him on for Van because I was doing all right, but Van just had no hope of getting through it. I think where this film works, it works on. I have a dissenting opinion from that. I think where the film works, it works on its verbal comedy.
Okay.
I think that's the strongest part of it.
Okay.
If you're enjoying that, you forgive a lot of the other stuff. But there's this. To return to what I said earlier, it's offensive. There's a lot of.
Yeah.
And we're not given breathing room.
Yes.
And we're not given time to reflect on how Barry's an essentially empty character. Barry Crocker has charisma. He's a charming bloke. We're being asked to identify with his point of view, to celebrate him as the hero of this, what we'll tentatively call the story. Barry Crocker, again, to return to the idea of this film as influential, Barry Crocker, I think he called his memoirs Bazza.
Huh.
The Adventures of
Right.
an Australian singer. Before this, he was mostly known as being a kind of like a crooner.
Okay.
He'd had one or two very excellent. I think
Okay.
he'd been on Skippy. Have you ever seen Skippy?
Okay, I know.
He'd been on Skippy, but he was mostly known for singing songs.
Right.
This film is kind of his most iconic. He's still alive.
Right.
This film is sort of like his most iconic role.
Right.
But I really wanted to. I came in wanting to like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Me too. I tried to be really open-minded coming into it, and it just kind of
but
was
it's
pushing buttons that.
it's too rough.
Yeah.
I just don't. It's and then and if you'll allow me to anticipate your answer about adaptation, it's too faithful to the comic. They didn't know what they. Beresford says, "Well, I hear there's a lot of money for films in Australia. Let's just write up a script and go ask for some." This is how he talks about how the film got made, how it was conceived. There was no burning desire to make a Barry McKenzie movie.
Right.
Rather, the money came first and the movie came second. So he and Humphries just strung together a bunch of these strips and turned it into a script.
Yeah.
And so for me, the adaptation, nay, that's not how you make a film. You don't just you don't just take you don't take a medium that's episodic.
Yeah.
Print it up, type it up, give it to your actors and expect it to make a film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a nay for me too, because as I hinted at earlier, like it is the storylines are close, the dialogue's close, but Barry's not enough of a target in the movie. It seems like he goes along and we're making fun of the folk band. We're making fun of the Gorts. We're making fun of all these other people. Barry is the guy that turns the lesbian straight.
You're right. He's not as stupid and ridiculous as he is in the comic. Here, as I said,
maybe that's
Crocker
why I like Bob and Doug's Strange Brews, because they're such dummies. Lovable dummies.
I mean, they try. I mean, it's a good choice to make Mackenzie a virgin, so all his bragging...
that's true. That is true. There's good elements in the movie, absolutely. We've talked about them, but as an adaptation, I mean, it's missing the bite, even the satirical bite of the...
enough.
You know, even like the thing with the art scene where they're vomiting on the walls and calling it art, like that's...
Yeah, the chundering, yeah.
I mean, maybe that's unfilmable.
It teaches everyone to chunder.
Yeah.
I think you could do, yeah. But, yeah, it's just clearly they had no vision.
Yes.
I think is the problem here.
Right.
They had no vision for a film.
Yeah.
They just said, there's $250,000 up for grabs. Type up those scripts.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's some scuttlebutt that Paul Hogan, speaking of Crocodile Dundee, could have been in this film.
Really?
Either as Barry himself or as Curly.
Where was his career at this stage?
Nowhere. No, he hadn't been in Crocodile Dundee yet, so he...
But what he had that sketch comedy show.
Yes, so he was
that?
He wasn't famous yet. He just come, as to quote the article, he'd just come down off the bridge because he famously worked on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and his star wasn't in the ascent yet. But he was well known enough that they thought about getting him as an ochre character, either as Curly or Barry himself. But he turned them down, apparently because maybe it didn't pay enough.
Huh.
Although Adams snarkily says that maybe he was frightened about working with professional actors.
Oh boy. I think does that cover it? Okay.
That covers it.
Okay, please like, rate, review, subscribe. Please join us on Facebook or Instagram to DM us or send us a comment, or on Blue Sky, where all the links are in the show notes. I don't really use any of these things anymore, but if you need to send us a message, that's the way to do it.
We'll get it.
You can send us an email as well. Oh, there were some comments on Judge Dredd, the two Judge Dredds on YouTube.
I'll check them out.
And I can't remember what they were, so I'll read them next week.
Brilliant.
We'll cover them next week. But yes, please leave comments even on YouTube, because we get notifications and I can reply to them on the show. You can also send us an email at the email address in the show notes. Please join our Patreon at patreon.com/comicbookmovieoblivion, because we need to buy these physical books. There's no other way to get them.
If I'd been able to if we'd been able to get the DVD, I would have been able to report on it firsthand rather than through this synopsis that I read on ozmovie.com.au. And I had to use the Wayback Machine because that website's gone down.
Right, okay. So next week we will cover the sequel. What's it called?
Barry McKenzie holds his own.
Oh, I guess it's a...
That's a pun.
Holding his penis joke.
Yes, Kumar, thank you.
Got it. Worked it out.
I have high hopes that it will restore my shattered faith in the Australian New Wave.
I'm going to read... So I read the first two of these 3 volumes, so I'm going to read the third one for that.
Groovy. I'm going to pick up where I left off.
Okay. And I think that covers it?
Indeed.
Okay.
I was down by Bondi Pier, drinking tubes of ice cold beer, with a bucket full of prawns upon me knee. When I swallowed the last prawn, I had a technically yawn, and I chundered in the old Pacific Sea. Drink it up, drink Pacific Sea.
As always, I have to remember how to do this because.
I can. I'll have a crack at the intro.
Okay, good.
I'll try and do some. Let's see how many Australianisms I can cram in. I'm going to do my best this episode.